it's got to be a labour of love, and to an extent, all the four I did, which were Jose Mourinho, Alex Ferguson, Herbert Chapman, and Matt Busby, which undoubtedly was the biggest labour of love. But the others became labours of love, apart from Ferguson one. I ended up liking him less. Well, when 24/7 rolling news and social media began to develop, there was a lot of fear. But I think that it's been considerably dispelled. I don't think it's, you ask, people ask if it's easier. It's never going to be easy. It's always going to be very, very difficult to get into what will always be a crowded profession, a crowded scene. But I think that fears that it would become more difficult have been dispelled, and I think that the opportunities are not only there now, but growing. As long as people are willing to get in, getting your foot through the door has always been the hardest part, and that bit hasn't changed. And once you're in, it's how much you want it and how good you are. A good sports journalist is made up of different things. There are many different kinds of good sports journalists. There are some who can write beautifully and find good subjects to write about, but aren't very good or very inclined to go out and get stories, to originate events, if you like, to make news by digging. So you can be a top sports journalist as a digger, someone who gets information and can identify what people are going to be interested in. Or more rare, you can rely, as I did during a career of 40 years, on such writing ability as I had. Even though I was absolutely hopeless at getting stories, but I still worked for 40 years. So there are so many different kinds. Others, another typical kind of sports writer is the one who's a brilliant interviewer, who has the knack of obtaining the confidence of interviewees and getting lots of interesting material out of them. And even then you can subdivide between aggressive interviewers, who are few and far between, the ones that can get away with it, and sympathetic interviewers who do the job by researching meticulously and finding ways to obtain the confidence of the subject by telling him or her something that they didn't know was widely known, and which charms them. So there's so many different kinds of sports journalists. There is mistrust of certain sections of the media, but I think it's getting less. Occasionally in life things get better. And I think that in the worst days of the tabloid wars in old-fashioned journalism, if you like, there was certain corners were cut that induced a lack of trust. I remember being at the World Cup in Italy in 1990 with England, and there was almost sort of a naked war caused by the perception among Bobby Robson and his players that the tabloids had been unfair to them. Broadsheets like me were sort of caught in the middle. I don't think it's as bad as that nowadays. I think that generally ethical standards among, well, I can speak mainly about football media, ethical standards have really improved, and I'm actually very proud of them. To do I've done 4 biographies of football managers of different eras. It's something that I tend to find managed, but probably because of my advanced age, I always seemed to be at the older end of the spectrum. And so I was consequently more attracted really to managers, people that I'd grown up with when they were players, than players. I mean, for most of my career, I've felt that I'm not of that, you know, I felt sort of self-conscious talking to players almost. And so what you need is an interest to write biographies. You need an interest and an affinity in your subjects, because you're going to be immersed in them for 1 year, 6 months if you're a fast worker, 2 years if you work at my pace. So it's got to be a labor of love. And to an extent, all the four I did, which were Jose Mourinho, Alex Ferguson, Herbert Chapman, and Matt Busby, which undoubtedly was the biggest labor of love. But the others became labors of love, apart from the Ferguson one. I ended up liking him less than when I started. But the others, you know, it was almost like a relationship developing. The most impressive manager, from my point of view as a journalist over 40 years, the most fascinating was Arsene Wenger. His press conferences were often not wholly about football. He would bring in things from current events that had nothing to do with football as illustrations of footballing points. I remember he once said, and a lot of the things that he said during sort of casual lines during press conferences, you would remember for the rest of your life. For example, he said once, I tend to favor players who are religious. You know, obviously, given the diversity of it wouldn't be just Christianity, it would be any religion. And he said that they tend to have a better sense of society, of their being a small part of a greater entity in a team game. Very, very important. So for things like that, for little bits of gobbets of fascinating, thought-provoking information, Arsene Wenger, yeah, definitely been my number one. If you talk about players, I think always of an ex-player, actually, Jamie Carragher. You could listen to him for ages because he's a real student of football, and is a real student of football. A lot of the players, the current players now, I don't have, you know, contact with them, but I must say a lot of them come across, the English ones, you know, particularly. I don't mean they're particularly nice, but I'm thinking of particularly a lot of Gareth Southgate's players. They come across as decent, clean, aware, clean-cut kids, you know? And I think the setup of the England team under Gareth Southgate has been really, really excellent. Okay, there have been a couple of moments where the media have had to come in and get the cane out, you know, but by and large, yeah, they seem to be a credit to Gareth Southgate and to their profession, most of them.